I'm Coco from SmileHome. I'm here with Jason Truesdell. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. Do you mind briefly introducing yourself before we begin?
Sure. Basically, I've been spending most of my adult life in software and started early on at Microsoft right after university. Knowing German and Japanese and something about the internet was enough to get a job back then. Built a lot of things, did international QA, I've done software development, I've been a CTO. I've also run an import-export business after leaving Microsoft sometime ago.
Very cool. So can you tell me a bit about why you've come to Japan?
There were a bunch of factors. In Seattle was kind of winding down. My wife and I discussed the possibility of bringing our kids to Japan for school. And my wife was also facing some health concerns that were easier to deal with in Japan. And her father also needed some assistance, suffering from medical issues of his own. And we thought it would be a good time to move to Japan. This was back in 2017. It was roughly the time that my oldest child was going to start first grade in Japan. So we, with no particular plan about work or specifics in mind, we filled up a shipping container and sent all of our household goods to Japan and figured out a place to live.
So you're planning to stay in Japan?
Yes, I have a pending permanent resident application, and my long-term plans are, there may be some years that I go back to the U.S., but we have a long-term focus yet.
So what exactly compels you to stay in Japan? Like, what draws you to be here? Do you have, any good experiences here?
The main reason for being here is for my family's needs. There's actually a lot of things that would be easier in the U.S. for me in terms of making an income. The salaries are much higher in my profession, but there are a lot of things that are easier. When I've had those periods of time when I didn't have that set job, being on the public health insurance program and having that be reasonably affordable was pretty important. Not really worrying about the stress of medical coverage, basic needs. We had a fair amount of savings when I came here, and we were in a better position than a lot of folks. But I think it's a good place to live comfortably. There are certainly some rough edges if you're not colored into the lines of the way society works, but it's been mostly good. Yeah.
It's important to be transparent. Of course, there's always going to be good and bad. Good experiences. But what about the difficulties that you've experienced as a foreigner looking for housing?
Well, when I first came here, I merely had savings. I had a fair amount of stock from Zillow, a company that I used to work for, and some other assets. And when we went to look for housing, one of the challenges was we had plenty of cash, but I didn't have a stable, regular job, so I wasn't going to be able to use my employer as a reference or any kind of assistance. I was just doing occasional project work, and at that time I don't think I even had a client lined up. And so the first thing that happened was we looked around, what was in the neighborhood that we wanted to be in, and my brother-in-law happened to be in real estate at the time. And so we talked to him, but many of the landlords were skeptical of, they would even look at my balance sheet and say, okay, so you apparently have enough cash that, you could prepay rent a year in advance, but what about the second year? And I'm like, well, we could prepay that if you wanted, if that's really important to you. And that still didn't resonate with some of the landlords that were on our radar. And we just kind of got lucky that there was some former corporate housing. I think it was Ineos, the gas company, that had been reverted to the general market and was within our price range. It was just very old and poorly insulated, like a lot of 45-year-old buildings. And, met our needs. It was the first place we toured, and we're like, okay, good enough.
So it sounds like it was difficult if you're not lucky to find housing here. But if you could do things differently, would you use SmileHome?
I obviously didn't know about SmileHome. I got here 7 years ago, I think, before this company was founded. I've since purchased a place, and I think one of the challenges we discovered when buying a place was, getting a loan and navigating all of that is really complicated. And having a real estate agent on your side who understands that process is really, really important. In fact, I think a lot of real estate agents here for home purchases, their opinion about your ability to afford and the loan sometimes give you additional credibility with the lenders. And so it's like this person seems like they know what they're doing, and I think, working with a company like SmileHome would probably be a worthwhile choice for a foreigner.
So you did a good job highlighting the downsides that a foreigner can encounter, which SmileHome can help alleviate. So my last question for you would be, do you have any tips for new arrivals looking to stay in Japan?
My circumstances are a little bit unusual because a lot of people come here for work. They might be not quite as well established in their career. Coming here with a fair amount of savings certainly opens some doors, and being open to a lot of things that may or may not be what you envisioned in your mind about how things would work out is pretty important. So many things that you can solve in the country that you come from with patterns and methods that just, are you might already be accustomed to, but you have to kind of rethink the way you deal with whatever hurdles come up. Sometimes just filling out an application form is more complicated because your name doesn't fit.
Yeah, so. That's very realistic. Yeah. Well, thank you for speaking with me today, Jason. You provided a lot of insightful things that I hope anybody that watches will find helpful or useful in the future when looking and working with SmileHome.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.